Sarah Martinez had always believed that strength came in many forms, but she never imagined it would be tested in the sterile corridors of Walter Reed Medical Center. The 24-year-old former Army medic sat in her wheelchair, staring at the rain streaking down the window of her rehabilitation room. 3 months had passed since the explosion in Afghanistan that changed everything, yet the memory remained as sharp as broken glass in her mind. The doctors had delivered their verdict with clinical precision: incomplete spinal cord injury, T12 level. Partial sensation below the injury site, but walking again was unlikely. The word unlikely had become her constant companion, whispered in medical consultations, echoed in the concerned voices of family members, and repeated in the doubt that crept into her thoughts during the long, sleepless nights. "Sarah, your family is here," announced Nurse Patricia, a kind woman whose smile never wavered despite the daily heartbreak she witnessed in the rehabilitation ward. Sarah forced a smile of her own, though it felt like wearing a mask that no longer fit properly. Her mother, Elena, entered first, carrying the familiar burden of worry that had settled permanently in her shoulders since that terrible phone call 3 months ago. Behind her came her father, Miguel, a retired construction foreman whose calloused hands now trembled slightly whenever he looked at his daughter. Her younger brother, Danny, followed, his usual teenage energy subdued in the presence of his sister's altered reality. "Mija, you look better today," Elena said, though her eyes betrayed the lie. Sarah's appearance had improved from the initial weeks of bandages and tubes, but the spark that once defined her seemed dimmed, like a candle struggling against the wind. Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice. How could she tell them that each day felt like swimming upstream against a current of despair? How could she explain that the woman who once ran 5 miles every morning now struggled to transfer from her bed to her wheelchair without assistance? Miguel cleared his throat, a habit he'd developed when words failed him. "The physical therapist says you're making progress with your transfers." "Progress," Sarah repeated, the word tasting bitter in her mouth. "Yesterday I dropped my water bottle 6 times trying to reach it from my bedside table." "Is that progress, Dad?" The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken fears and broken dreams. Danny, who had always looked up to his sister as his hero, fidgeted with his phone, unable to meet her eyes. Sarah had been his role model, the one who taught him to ride a bike, helped him with homework, and showed him that anything was possible with determination. Now, seeing her struggle with the simplest tasks felt like watching a superhero lose their powers. Dr. Peterson, Sarah's primary physician, knocked and entered with Sarah's chart in hand. He was a competent doctor, but Sarah had grown tired of his measured optimism and carefully chosen words that always seemed to dance around the truth she needed to hear. "How are we feeling today, Sarah?" he asked, pulling up a chair beside her wheelchair. "We?" Sarah's voice carried an edge that made her family exchange worried glances. "I think I'm the only one feeling anything here, Doctor." Dr. Peterson maintained his professional composure. "I understand your frustration. Recovery from this type of injury is challenging, and it's normal to experience a range of emotions." Sarah's laugh was hollow. "Normal? Nothing about this is normal. 3 months ago, I was saving lives in a combat zone. I was somebody who mattered. Now I can't even button my own shirt without it taking 20 minutes. Elena reached for her daughter's hand, but Sarah pulled away. The rejection stung, but Sarah couldn't bear the weight of her mother's hope. Hope felt like a luxury she couldn't afford anymore. "Sarah," Dr. Peterson continued, "your injury is significant, but it's not the end of your story. Many patients with similar injuries go on to live fulfilling lives. There are adaptive sports, career retraining programs, and technological advances that can help you regain independence." "Fulfilling lives," Sarah repeated. "Is that what we're calling it? Learning to live with less and pretending it's enough?" The room fell silent again. Outside, the rain continued its relentless rhythm against the window, matching the steady drip of despair that had been slowly filling Sarah's heart since the accident. Danny finally spoke up, his voice cracking slightly. "Sarah, remember when you taught me to shoot free throws? You said missing shots was just practice for making them. You said giving up was the only real failure." Sarah's eyes filled with tears she'd been holding back for weeks. "That was different, Danny. This isn't about missing shots.
This is about not being able to stand at the free throw line. The weight of her words settled over the room like a heavy blanket.
Her family had come expecting to offer encouragement, but instead found themselves confronting the depth of Sarah's despair. They had seen her overcome challenges before: the rigorous training to become a medic, the deployment to a war zone, the daily courage required to save lives under fire. But this was different.
This felt insurmountable. Miguel stood and walked to the window, his reflection ghost-like in the rain-streaked glass.
"When I was building houses, sometimes we'd hit bedrock when digging foundations. The young guys would want to give up, find an easier spot.
But bedrock isn't a problem, it's just where the real work begins."
"I'm not bedrock, Dad," Sarah said quietly.
"I'm broken."
"No, Mija," Elena said, her voice stronger than it had been in months.
"You're not broken.
You're different now, but you're not broken. The daughter who volunteered to serve her country, who ran toward danger while others ran away, who saved 17 soldiers, lives in Afghanistan. That person is still here. She's just learning a new way to stand tall." Sarah wanted to believe her mother's words, but they felt like trying to hold water in cupped hands. Everything that had defined her, her physical strength, her independence, her role as a protector and healer, felt lost in the explosion that claimed her mobility. Dr. Peterson made a note in Sarah's chart.
"I'd like to discuss some options for your continued rehabilitation. There's a specialized program that might interest you.
It's run by former military personnel who understand the unique challenges faced by wounded veterans."
Sarah's interest was minimal, but she nodded for her family's sake.
She had attended countless therapy sessions, support groups, and motivational presentations. Each one promised a path forward, but none had managed to bridge the gap between who she was and who she might become. That evening, after her family left, Sarah sat alone in her room as darkness settled over the medical center. The building grew quiet except for the soft sounds of medical equipment and the occasional footsteps of night staff in the hallway. This was when the weight of her reality felt heaviest, when the distractions of visitors and therapy sessions gave way to the stark truth of her situation. She transferred from her wheelchair to her bed, a process that still required careful planning and effort despite weeks of practice. As she settled under the covers, she thought about the letter she had started writing several times but never finished. It was addressed to Lieutenant Monica Chen, her former commanding officer, who had recommended Sarah for a Bronze Star for her actions on the day of the explosion.
The recommendation felt like a cruel joke now. How could someone who couldn't navigate a curb without assistance be called a hero?
The medal would join the other reminders of her former life: photos from deployment, letters from soldiers whose lives she had saved, commendations from superior officers who praised her courage and dedication. Sarah closed her eyes and allowed herself to remember that day in Afghanistan.
Her unit had been providing medical support for a convoy operation when the IED detonated. The explosion had been massive, leaving multiple casualties scattered across the road.
Despite the ongoing threat of enemy fire, Sarah had moved from soldier to soldier, providing emergency care under conditions that would have paralyzed most people with fear. She had saved 3 lives that day before the second explosion caught her while she was treating Corporal Jenkins, a 19-year-old from Ohio whose leg had been nearly severed by shrapnel. The blast that ended Sarah's military career had been the one that ultimately saved Jenkins' life, as her body had shielded him from the worst of the debris.
The irony wasn't lost on her.
She had spent her career healing others, and now she couldn't heal herself. The skills that had made her exceptional as a combat medic, quick thinking, steady hands, the ability to remain calm under pressure, felt useless in her current reality. A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Expecting to see a nurse with medication, Sarah was surprised when a man in civilian clothes entered. He was tall, with the bearing of someone accustomed to command, though his clothes gave no indication of military service.
"Sergeant Martinez? I'm Commander Rick Harrison, retired Navy SEAL.
I apologize for the late hour, but I was hoping we could talk."
Sarah studied the man before her.
There was something in his eyes that looked familiar, not in terms of recognition, but in the way they held both strength and understanding. She had seen that look before in the eyes of soldiers who had faced their own battles and emerged changed but not defeated. "I'm not really interested in another pep talk, Commander. the motivational speakers have worn out their welcome. Commander Harrison pulled up the chair that Dr. Peterson had vacated hours earlier.
I'm not here to give you a pep talk, Sergeant. I'm here because I think you might be interested in something different.
Something that doesn't involve pretending your situation is anything other than exactly what it is. His directness caught Sarah off guard. Most visitors, even well-meaning ones, seemed to dance around the reality of her condition, offering platitudes about overcoming obstacles and finding new purposes.
This man's approach was refreshingly honest. What did you have in mind? Sarah asked, curious despite herself. There's a program I run for wounded veterans. It's not therapy, and it's not rehabilitation in the traditional sense. It's about rediscovering what it means to be a warrior when the battlefield changes. Sarah raised an eyebrow.
That sounds like a pep talk with different words, Commander.
Harrison smiled, and Sarah noticed it reached his eyes in a way that suggested genuine understanding rather than professional courtesy. Fair enough. Let me be more specific.
In 6 weeks, I'm taking a group of wounded veterans on a survival training exercise. It's designed to push you beyond what you think you're capable of in your current condition.
Most people would call it impossible for someone in a wheelchair.
Most people would be right, Sarah replied, though something in his words had sparked a flicker of interest she hadn't felt in months.
Maybe. Or maybe most people don't understand what a warrior really is.
Harrison leaned forward slightly.
I've read your file, Sergeant. I know what you did in Afghanistan. I know about the lives you saved and the courage you showed under fire. That person didn't disappear in the explosion. She's still here, just learning to fight a different kind of battle.
Sarah felt a familiar tightness in her chest, the same feeling she'd experienced before every mission in Afghanistan, a mixture of fear and anticipation that signaled something significant was about to happen. She had thought that feeling was lost forever, another casualty of her injury.
What would this survival training involve, she heard herself ask.
Navigation, shelter building, emergency medical care, tactical planning, and marksmanship.
The same skills that made you effective in Afghanistan, adapted for your current capabilities.
The mention of marksmanship made Sarah's pulse quicken slightly. She had been an excellent marksman before her injury, but the idea of handling a weapon again felt both thrilling and terrifying. Her hands, which had once been steady under the most extreme pressure, now sometimes shook when she was tired or stressed.
I don't think I can do this, Commander. I'm not the person I used to be. Harrison stood, preparing to leave. You're right, Sergeant. You're not the person you used to be. The question is, who are you now, and what is that person capable of?
He placed a business card on her bedside table.
The program starts in 6 weeks at a facility in Colorado. If you decide you want to find out what you're really made of, give me a call.
After he left, Sarah stared at the business card for a long time. Outside her window, the rain had stopped, and a few stars were beginning to appear in the clearing sky. For the first time since her injury, Sarah allowed herself to imagine a future that involved more than just learning to cope with loss.
The card bore simple text, Harrison Tactical Training, Redefining Possible.
Below it was a phone number and an address in Colorado Springs. Sarah had never been to Colorado, but she imagined mountains and open spaces, places where the horizon stretched far beyond the confines of hospital walls.
She thought about Commander Harrison's words, "Who are you now, and what is that person capable of?"
It was a question that demanded more than self-pity or resigned acceptance. It required the same kind of courage she had shown in Afghanistan, but directed inward rather than toward external threats. Sarah picked up the phone by her bed, then set it down again.
The call could wait until morning.
Tonight, she wanted to sit with the possibility that had been planted in her mind. For the first time in 3 months, the word impossible didn't feel like a verdict. It felt like a challenge. As sleep finally came, Sarah's dreams were filled not with explosions and hospital rooms, but with mountains and open sky. In her dreams, she was moving again, not in the way she once had, but in a new way that was uniquely hers. When she woke the next morning, the business card was still there, and so was the possibility it represented. Sarah stared at Commander Harrison's business card for 3 days before she found the courage to dial the number. Each time she reached for the phone, doubt crept in like fog rolling over a valley.
What if she wasn't strong enough? What if the program exposed her as the broken shell she believed herself to be? The questions multiplied until the simple act of making a phone call felt like preparing for battle. On the 4th morning, Danny visited alone.
He found her sitting by the window, the business card turning over and over in her hands like a prayer wheel. "You've been holding that thing since I got here," he observed, settling into the visitor's chair.
"Are you going to call or just wear it out?"
Sarah looked at her younger brother, noting how much older he seemed since her injury. The carefree teenager had been replaced by someone who carried worry in his shoulders and spoke with careful consideration. She hated that her situation had stolen some of his youth. "I'm scared, Danny," she admitted, the words feeling strange in her mouth. Fear wasn't something she had acknowledged easily in the past, even to herself.
Of what? Sarah considered the question.
Of trying and failing. Of proving that everyone who says I should just accept my limitations is right.
Of being seen as weak.
Danny was quiet for a moment, then leaned forward in his chair.
"Remember when I was 8 and wanted to try out for the school baseball team?
I was terrible at it, but you made me practice anyway. You said the worst thing that could happen was that I'd find out I wasn't good at baseball, and the best thing that could happen was that I'd surprise myself."
"That was different," Sarah protested.
"You were 8. The stakes were lower."
"Were they?" Danny asked.
At 8 years old, not making the baseball team felt like the end of the world.
"But you taught me that the real victory was in the trying, not in the outcome."
Sarah felt tears threatening again.
Her brother's wisdom, delivered in his still cracking voice, cut through her defenses more effectively than any counseling session.
"What if I can't do it?" she whispered.
"Then, you can't do it," Danny said simply.
"But what if you can?"
That afternoon, Sarah finally made the call.
Commander Harrison answered on the second ring, his voice calm and professional.
"Commander Harrison. This is Sergeant Sarah Martinez. We spoke a few days ago about your training program."
"Sergeant Martinez, I was hoping you'd call.
Have you given some thought to what we discussed?" Sarah took a deep breath.
"I have questions."
"Fire away. Will there be other people like me?"
"In wheelchairs, I mean."
"Some.
Others have different injuries. What they have in common is that they're all warriors who've had to redefine what that means."
"What if I can't keep up? What if I slow everyone down?" Harrison's chuckle was warm rather than dismissive.
"Sergeant, in my experience, the people who worry about slowing others down are usually the ones pushing everyone else forward.
Besides, this isn't a race.
It's about discovering what you're capable of when you stop focusing on what you've lost."
Sarah gripped the phone tighter.
"I don't know if I'm ready for this, Commander."
"Nobody ever is. That's what makes it worthwhile."
The conversation continued for 20 minutes, with Harrison explaining the program's structure, expectations, and goals. The 6-week intensive would take place at a facility in the Colorado Rockies, where participants would learn wilderness survival skills, tactical planning, and adaptive combat techniques. The program was physically demanding but designed to accommodate different types of injuries and limitations. "There's one more thing," Sergeant Harrison said before they ended the call.
"This program isn't about fixing what's broken. It's about building something new with what remains."
If you're looking for someone to tell you that you'll go back to being exactly who you were before, I'm not that person.
But if you want to discover who you might become, then we should talk more.
After hanging up, Sarah sat in the quiet of her room, processing what she had committed to. The program would begin in 5 weeks, giving her time to improve her physical conditioning and prepare mentally for the challenge. For the first time since her injury, she had a goal that extended beyond simply learning to navigate daily life from a wheelchair. Dr. Peterson was cautiously supportive when Sarah informed him of her plans. He adjusted her therapy schedule to include more intensive upper body strengthening and wheelchair mobility training. The physical therapists, initially skeptical,
gradually became enthusiastic as they saw Sarah's motivation return.
"I haven't seen you this focused since you arrived," noted Maria, her primary physical therapist, as Sarah completed her third set of challenging transfers. "Whatever this program is about, it's already helping."
Sarah's family had mixed reactions.
Elena was worried about the physical demands and the remote location. Miguel, true to his nature, was practical in his concerns about logistics and medical support.
Danny, however, was unequivocally supportive.
"This is the first time you've sounded like yourself since you've been back," he told her.
"Whatever happens in Colorado, at least you'll be moving forward instead of standing still."
The weeks of preparation passed quickly. Sarah threw herself into conditioning with an intensity that reminded everyone of her pre-injury dedication to fitness. She worked with occupational therapists to improve her wheelchair techniques, practiced transfers until they became second nature, and spent hours in the physical therapy gym building the upper body strength that would serve as her foundation. Commander Harrison called weekly to check on her progress and answer questions. These conversations became something Sarah looked forward to, not because they were encouraging in the traditional sense, but because Harrison treated her like a warrior preparing for a mission rather than a patient recovering from trauma. "How's your marksmanship training going?" he asked during one call.
"I haven't started yet," Sarah admitted. "I'm not sure I'm ready to handle weapons again."
"Why not?" The question was simple, but it forced Sarah to examine her reluctance. "My hands shake sometimes when I'm tired or stressed. I don't trust my fine motor control like I used to."
"Understood.
But you won't know what you're capable of until you try. I've arranged for you to work with Master Sergeant Williams at the range on base.
He's adapted marksmanship training for wounded veterans before."
The first time Sarah rolled onto the firing range, the familiar smell of gun oil and powder brought back a flood of memories from her military training. Master Sergeant Williams was a patient instructor who understood that her challenges weren't just physical but psychological. "The key," he explained, "is adapting your technique to work with your current capabilities rather than against them."
Different doesn't mean inferior.
Over several sessions, Sarah learned modified shooting positions that accounted for her seated position and worked to rebuild her confidence with various weapons. Her accuracy wasn't what it had been before her injury, but it was better than she had dared hope. "Muscle memory is a powerful thing," Williams observed as Sarah completed a challenging target sequence. "Your brain remembers how to do this, even if the execution is different now." As departure day approached, Sarah's nervousness increased. She had shared her preparations with her family, but she hadn't fully described the scope of what she was attempting. The program materials described challenging terrain, unpredictable weather, and scenarios designed to push participants beyond their comfort zones. 2 nights before leaving, Elena sat with her daughter in the rehabilitation center's common area. They watched the evening news together, a routine that had developed during Sarah's recovery.
"Mija, are you sure about this?" Elena asked during a commercial break.
"It's not too late to wait, maybe do it next year when you're stronger." Sarah understood her mother's concern, but waiting felt like surrendering to the fear that had already taken too much from her. "Mama, I've been getting stronger for months, but it's not physical strength I'm lacking.
It's the belief that I can be more than what happened to me." Elena nodded, the worry remained etched in her features. "Just promise me you'll be careful. You're all I have."
"You have Dad and Danny too," Sarah reminded her gently.
"It's not the same.
You're my strength, Mija.
Even now, even like this.
Watching you fight your way back has shown me what real courage looks like."
The words hit Sarah unexpectedly.
She had been so focused on what she had lost that she hadn't considered what others might see in her struggle. The idea that her fight for recovery could be an inspiration rather than a defeat was difficult to accept, but it planted a seed of possibility. On her final night at Walter Reed, Sarah packed her gear with methodical precision. The specialized equipment provided by Harrison's program included an all-terrain wheelchair designed for wilderness use, adapted camping gear, and clothing suitable for Colorado's mountain climate. Dr. Peterson stopped by to provide final medical clearances and emergency contact information. "I want you to know, Sergeant, that regardless of what happens in Colorado, you've already achieved more than most people thought possible. Your progress here has been remarkable.
Thank you, Doctor, but I feel like I'm just getting started.
That night, Sarah didn't sleep well, but it wasn't due to the usual anxiety that had plagued her nights. Instead, it was the restless energy of anticipation, the same feeling she had experienced before deployments. Her body recognized the signs of preparation for something significant. Danny arrived early the next morning to see her off. The airport transportation had arrived, and Sarah's specialized equipment was being loaded into an adapted vehicle. "I'm proud of you," he said simply, hugging her tightly. "Not because you're doing this program, but because you decided to try."
That's the sister I remember. The flight to Colorado Springs was smooth, but Sarah's mind raced throughout the journey.
She reviewed the program materials again, studied maps of the training area, and mentally prepared herself for meeting the other participants. Commander Harrison had mentioned that the group would be diverse in terms of injuries and military backgrounds, but she wondered how she would fit into the dynamic. Colorado Springs Airport was bustling with activity, and Sarah felt momentarily overwhelmed by the chaos after months in the controlled environment of the medical center. She navigated through the crowds, her all-terrain wheelchair handling the busy terminal more easily than her standard hospital chair would have. Commander Harrison met her at baggage claim, dressed in civilian outdoor gear that spoke of serious mountain experience. With him was a woman Sarah didn't recognize, also in a wheelchair, with the bearing of someone accustomed to command. "Sergeant Martinez, welcome to Colorado," Harrison said, extending his hand.
"This is Captain Jessica Chen, Marine Corps, retired. She'll be your partner for the initial phase of training." Captain Chen's grip was firm, her eyes direct and assessing. "Good to meet you, Martinez. How was the flight?" "Nerve-wracking," Sarah admitted honestly. Chen smiled, the expression transforming her serious features. "Good. If you weren't nervous, I'd be worried about your judgment."
The drive to the training facility took them through increasingly remote terrain, winding mountain roads that offered spectacular views of the Colorado Rockies. Sarah found herself pressed against the window, taking in landscape that seemed impossibly vast after months of hospital walls.
"First time in Colorado?" Chen asked from beside her. "First time anywhere like this. I grew up in South Texas. Different kind of wide open spaces. Wait until you see the facility. It's unlike anything you've experienced."
The Harrison Tactical Training Facility occupied several hundred acres in a valley surrounded by peaks that seemed to touch the sky. The main buildings were rustic but modern, designed to blend with the natural environment while providing necessary amenities. Sarah could see obstacle courses, training areas, and what appeared to be a firing range in the distance. "Home for the next 6 weeks," Harrison announced as they pulled up to the main lodge. "Your fellow warriors are waiting inside." Sarah took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and prepared to meet the people who would share her journey into the unknown. For the first time since her injury, she felt like she was exactly where she needed to be. The main lodge of Harrison Tactical Training buzzed with nervous energy as 8 wounded veterans gathered for their first group meeting. Sarah wheeled herself through the entrance, taking in the rustic interior decorated with military memorabilia and photographs of previous program graduates. The faces in those photos showed a transformation she couldn't quite identify, something beyond physical healing, a rekindled spark that seemed to shine from within. Commander Harrison stood at the front of the room beside a large tactical map of the surrounding mountains.
The other participants were seated in a rough semicircle, each dealing with their own visible and invisible wounds.
Sarah recognized the careful way they held themselves, the hypervigilance that came with military training combined with the adjustments required by injury. "Welcome, warriors," Harrison began, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to addressing troops before difficult missions. "For the next 6 weeks, you'll be pushing beyond what you believe possible.
This isn't therapy. This isn't rehabilitation. This is warrior training for the new battlefield of your life."
Sarah studied her fellow participants as Harrison spoke. Besides Captain Chen, there was Staff Sergeant Marcus Thompson, an Army Ranger who had lost his left arm to an IED in Iraq. His adaptation to single-arm function was impressive, but Sarah could see the frustration in his movements when tasks required two hands.
Petty Officer First Class Amanda Rodriguez sat with the rigid posture of someone fighting invisible demons. Her file listed PTSD and traumatic brain injury from a mortar attack on her base in Afghanistan. She appeared physically intact, but Sarah recognized the haunted look of someone battling wars that couldn't be seen. Corporal David Park had lost both legs below the knee and wore advanced prosthetics that looked more like technological marvels than medical devices. He moved with determined efficiency, but Sarah noticed how he avoided looking down at his artificial limbs, as if maintaining the illusion of wholeness through careful visual management. The group also included Technical Sergeant Lisa Wang, an Air Force medic like Sarah who dealt with severe burn scars covering 30% of her body. She wore long sleeves despite the warm lodge interior, and Sarah understood the desire to hide evidence of trauma from curious eyes. Sergeant First Class Robert Mitchell was the oldest member of their group at 35, a Green Beret who used a cane and moved with the careful gait of someone managing chronic pain from multiple injuries. His eyes held the deep weariness of too many deployments and too many losses. Finally, there was Lance Corporal Tyler Brooks, the youngest at 22, who had suffered a traumatic brain injury that affected his speech and coordination. He worked hard to form words clearly, the effort visible in his concentration during conversations. Each of you has faced what others would consider impossible circumstances, Harrison continued. You've survived combat, injuries that would break most people, and the challenge of rebuilding your identity after trauma. What we're going to do here is harness that survival instinct and direct it toward creating something new. Captain Shen, who Sarah learned had been through the program 2 years earlier and now served as an instructor, stood to address the group. The next 6 weeks will challenge everything you think you know about your limitations. You'll discover capabilities you didn't know you possessed and strengths you thought were lost forever. The first week was dedicated to assessment and team building. Each morning began at dawn with adapted physical training designed to push everyone regardless of their specific injuries. Sarah discovered muscles she had forgotten existed as she propelled her all-terrain wheelchair through obstacle courses that seemed designed by someone with a sadistic sense of humor. The chair doesn't define your mobility, Chen explained during a particularly challenging navigation exercise. It's a tool, like any other piece of military equipment. Master the tool, and you master the terrain. The wheelchair obstacle course required Sarah to navigate steep inclines, rocky terrain, and narrow passages that seemed impossible at first attempt. Her shoulders burned with effort, and her hands developed new calluses from gripping the specialized wheels. But, with each successful completion, her confidence grew incrementally. Staff Sergeant Thompson struggled with rope climbing until instructors showed him how to use his legs and core strength to compensate for his missing arm. His breakthrough moment came when he successfully completed a climb that had defeated him repeatedly over 3 days. The cheer that went up from the group when he reached the top spoke to their collective investment in each other's success. Corporal Park's prosthetics were remarkable pieces of technology, but they required constant adjustment and maintenance. He spent hours each evening working with the program's prosthetists to optimize their function for the demands of wilderness training. Sarah watched him methodically problem-solve challenges that would have frustrated others to the point of quitting. The marksmanship training was where Sarah expected to shine, given her military background, but her first day at the range was humbling. Her hands, which had once been rock-steady under pressure, trembled with fatigue and stress. Her shots scattered across the target in patterns that bore no resemblance to her former accuracy. "Breathe," Master Sergeant Williams coached from beside her firing position. "You're fighting your equipment instead of working with it. Your technique needs to adapt to your current reality, not try to recreate your past performance." Under Williams' guidance, Sarah learned to brace her shooting position differently, using the wheelchair and a specialized rest to create stability. Slowly, her groups tightened, and her confidence began to return. By the end of the first week, she was achieving accuracy that approached her pre-injury standards. The evening debriefing sessions were perhaps the most challenging part of each day. Harrison insisted on complete honesty about struggles, fears, and breakthroughs. The group gradually opened up, sharing stories that went far beyond their physical injuries.
Rodriguez spoke about nightmares that made sleep feel dangerous, describing how the sound of helicopters or unexpected noises could send her into panic attacks that left her feeling weak and exposed. Her voice shook as she admitted, "I used to be fearless. Now I'm afraid of my own shadow sometimes." Mitchell described the chronic pain that colored every moment of his day, the way it sapped his energy and made him feel like a burden to his family. "My wife tries to understand, but how do you explain that some days just getting out of bed feels like climbing Mount Everest?" Park's struggle was different but equally profound. "People see the prosthetics and think technology has solved my problem. They don't understand that I'll never again run on a beach, feel sand between my toes, or have the simple pleasure of walking barefoot through grass. The technology is amazing, but it's not the same as what I lost." Sarah found herself opening up about her own battles with identity and purpose. "I was a medic. My job was to fix people, to save lives. Now I can't even fix myself. What good is a healer who needs healing?" It was during the second week that Harrison introduced the concept that would become central to Sarah's transformation. The group was gathered around a campfire after a particularly challenging day of wilderness navigation training when he brought out a collection of military weapons. "Tonight, we're going to talk about tools and identity," Harrison announced, placing an M4 carbine across his knees. "Each of you had a relationship with your weapon in the military. It was an extension of yourself, a tool that defined your capability and your role. Tonight, you're going to reclaim that relationship." Sarah felt her heart rate increase as Harrison approached her with a modified M4. The weapon had been adapted with specialized grips and a custom mounting system designed to interface with her wheelchair. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. "Sergeant Martinez," Harrison said formally, "I place this weapon in your hands not as a symbol of destruction, but as a tool of protection and precision. You are not broken. You are not helpless. You are a warrior learning to fight a new kind of battle." The weight of the rifle in her hands felt like coming home after a long journey. Her muscle memory engaged automatically, checking the weapon's condition, testing its balance, feeling for the familiar controls that connected soldier to tool. But this was different. The mounting system allowed her to achieve stability and accuracy she hadn't thought possible from her wheelchair. As each member of the group received their adapted weapon, something shifted in the group dynamic. These weren't patients receiving medical equipment, they were warriors reclaiming their tools and their identity. The firearms had been modified to work with each person's specific injuries, but they remained capable, professional-grade weapons. The next morning's live-fire exercise was a revelation for Sarah. Using the specialized mounting system, she achieved accuracy that exceeded her expectations and approached her pre-injury performance. The familiar crack of rounds downrange, the smell of gunpowder, and the satisfaction of tight shot groups awakened something in her that had been dormant since Afghanistan. "Outstanding shooting, Sergeant," Williams observed as Sarah completed a challenging precision course. "Your fundamentals are solid, and you've adapted to your equipment beautifully." But it wasn't just about accuracy. The act of successfully employing a precision weapon from her wheelchair had shattered a mental barrier Sarah hadn't fully recognized. If she could master this challenging skill, what else might be possible? The program's third week introduced tactical scenarios that combined all the skills they had been developing. Teams of 2 or 3 participants were given complex problems to solve using navigation, marksmanship, medical skills, and strategic thinking. The scenarios were designed to simulate real-world challenges while accounting for each person's capabilities and limitations. Sarah found herself paired with Corporal Park for a scenario involving navigation to a remote location, establishment of an observation post, and coordination of a simulated rescue operation. The mission required them to work together seamlessly, combining her medical and tactical skills with his technical expertise and prosthetic mobility. The terrain was brutal, rocky, steep, and unforgiving. Sarah's all-terrain wheelchair was pushed to its limits as they climbed trails that seemed designed more for mountain goats than humans. Park's prosthetics required constant adjustment, but his determination never wavered. "How are you holding up?" Sarah asked during a brief rest on a narrow ledge that offered spectacular views of the valley below. "Better than I expected," Park replied, adjusting the fit of his left prosthetic. 6 months ago, I couldn't walk to the mailbox without exhaustion.
Now I'm climbing mountains. What changed? Park considered the question as he gazed out at the surrounding peaks.
I stopped trying to be the person I was before and started figuring out who I could become. The legs I lost were strong, but they weren't everything I was. Their mission was successful, but, more importantly, Sarah realized she had spent 8 hours in the backcountry without once thinking about her limitations. She had focused entirely on the objective, working with her equipment and her partner to overcome challenges that would have seemed impossible from a hospital bed. That evening, as the group debriefed their various scenarios, Sarah noticed a change in the way they spoke about themselves.
The language of limitation and loss was being gradually replaced by discussions of capability and adaptation.
They were beginning to see themselves as warriors again, different from what they had been before, but no less formidable. Today proved something important. Harrison addressed the group as they sat around the campfire.
You are not diminished by your injuries. You are refined by them.
The person who can overcome what you've overcome and still push forward is stronger than the person who never faced that challenge. Rodriguez, who had struggled with panic attacks throughout the first 2 weeks, had successfully completed a complex communication scenario despite equipment failures and time pressure that should have triggered her PTSD symptoms. I felt like myself again today, she said quietly. Not the broken version, but the real me. Mitchell, despite chronic pain that never fully subsided, had led a team through a challenging problem-solving exercise that required both physical endurance and strategic thinking. The pain is still there, he acknowledged, but it doesn't define what I can accomplish anymore. Sarah looked around the fire at her fellow warriors and saw something that hadn't been there when they arrived. It wasn't just confidence, though that was part of it. It was a recognition of their own resilience, an understanding that they possessed capabilities that went far beyond what their injuries might suggest. As the third week concluded, Sarah realized that Commander Harrison's promise was being fulfilled. She wasn't being fixed or returned to her previous state. She was being transformed into something new, something that incorporated both her loss and her strength into an identity that was uniquely hers. The weapon that had been placed in her hands was more than a tool of precision and protection. It was a symbol of trust in her capability, trust in her judgment, and trust in her future as a warrior who happened to use a wheelchair rather than a broken person who happened to have military training. For the first time since her injury, Sarah began to believe that her story was not ending but transitioning to a new chapter that might be even more meaningful than what had come before. The fourth week of training brought with it a challenge that would test everything Sarah and her fellow warriors had learned about themselves and their capabilities. Commander Harrison announced the final phase of their program, a 5-day survival exercise in the backcountry of the Colorado Rockies, where they would be completely self-sufficient and required to navigate, survive, and complete objectives using only their skills and adapted equipment. This is not a simulation, Harrison emphasized as the group gathered around detailed topographical maps of their operational area. You'll be dealing with real altitude, real weather, real consequences for poor decisions. The only way you leave that mountain is by completing the mission or by emergency evacuation. Sarah studied the terrain they would be crossing, her medic training automatically cataloging potential hazards and medical challenges. The route covered nearly 30 miles of wilderness, including elevations above 10,000 feet, stream crossings, and exposure to weather that could change from sunny to life-threatening within hours. Each participant would carry specialized survival gear adapted for their specific needs, along with emergency communication equipment and medical supplies. Sarah's load included her all-terrain wheelchair's winter configuration, cold-weather gear designed for wheelchair users, and a compact medical kit that would allow her to provide trauma care in field conditions. The night before departure, Sarah called her family from the lodge's communications center. The conversation felt different from their previous talks during her hospitalization. There was an energy in her voice that hadn't been there for months. "Mija, you sound like yourself again," Elena observed with tears in her voice. "Are you safe where you are?" "I'm safer than I've been in a long time, Mama." "Not physically, tomorrow is going to be dangerous. But I feel like I know who I am again." Danny's excitement was infectious when he got on the phone. "Sarah, you have to tell me everything when you get back." Dad's been watching videos about mountain survival, and he says what you're doing is incredible. Tell Dad I'm using everything he taught me about being prepared and thinking ahead. And tell him I understand now what he meant about bedrock being where the real work begins." Miguel's voice was gruff with emotion when he took the phone. "Mija, I'm proud of you. Not because you're climbing mountains, but because you refuse to give up. Come home safe, but come home knowing what you're worth." The conversation with her family reinforced something Sarah had been feeling throughout the program. She wasn't just healing from her injury, she was discovering strengths and capabilities she hadn't known she possessed even before Afghanistan. The group's departure was scheduled for dawn, but Sarah woke before her alarm, filled with the familiar pre-mission energy that she remembered from her military days. This time, however, the nervousness was tempered by confidence in her equipment, her training, and her teammates. Captain Chen conducted the final equipment inspection with military precision, checking each person's gear and reviewing emergency procedures. The adapted equipment was impressive: wheelchairs designed for extreme terrain, prosthetics optimized for wilderness use, and specialized gear that enabled each warrior to function effectively in challenging conditions. "Remember," Chen addressed the group as they prepared to move out, "you are not here to prove you can overcome your disabilities. You're here to prove that your disabilities don't define your capabilities." The first day's objective was to reach a designated base camp 12 miles away, crossing terrain that included rocky trails, stream crossings, and a significant elevation gain. Sarah's all-terrain wheelchair, equipped with specialized tires and a low gear ratio, performed better than she had dared hope on the challenging trails. Staff Sergeant Thompson, paired with Sarah for the navigation exercise, proved to be an excellent teammate despite the coordination required to manage tasks that normally demanded two hands. His map reading skills were exceptional, and his positive attitude helped Sarah push through moments when the physical demands threatened to overwhelm her. "You know what I realized yesterday?" Thompson said during a water break on a particularly steep section of trail. "I spent so much time focusing on what I couldn't do with one arm that I never explored what I might do better than before. My balance has actually improved because I'm more conscious of how I move." Sarah understood exactly what he meant. Her wheelchair forced her to approach obstacles differently, often finding routes and techniques that were more efficient than traditional methods. She was developing a different kind of tactical thinking, one that automatically accounted for adaptive approaches to problems. The stream crossing presented their first major challenge. The water was cold, fast-moving, and deep enough to pose a serious risk if anyone lost their footing. Traditional crossing techniques wouldn't work for wheelchair users or those with prosthetics that couldn't get wet. Working together, the group developed an innovative solution. Using rope and mechanical advantage systems they had learned during training, they created a zipline that allowed Sarah to traverse the stream while keeping her wheelchair and equipment dry. It took longer than a conventional crossing, but it was safer and more reliable. "Adapt and overcome," Thompson observed with satisfaction as they completed the crossing. "We're not just surviving out here, we're excelling." The first night in the backcountry was Sarah's first time camping since her injury. The specialized equipment worked flawlessly, her sleeping system kept her warm and comfortable despite the altitude and dropping temperatures. But, more importantly, she felt connected to the wilderness in a way that reminded her why she had always loved the outdoors. Lying in her sleeping bag under a canopy of stars more brilliant than any she had seen from a hospital window, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this mountain. 6 months ago, she couldn't transfer from her bed to her wheelchair without assistance. Tonight, she was sleeping in the Colorado wilderness after completing a challenging day of mountain navigation. The second day brought weather that tested everyone's resolve. A late spring storm moved through the area, bringing snow, wind, and visibility that dropped to mere yards. Navigation became a matter of dead reckoning and compass work, skills that required absolute precision when mistakes could lead to serious danger. Sarah found herself taking point on navigation, her medic training having included extensive work with maps and compass in adverse conditions. The responsibility felt natural, and she realized that leadership wasn't diminished by physical limitations, it was defined by competence, judgment, and the ability to make good decisions under pressure. "Martinez, you're reading this terrain like a book," observed Petty Officer Rodriguez, who was struggling with the psychological stress of limited visibility and the vulnerability it created.
How do you stay so calm?
Training, Sarah replied, but, as she said it, she realized there was more to it.
And accepting that I can handle whatever comes up. 6 months ago, I thought I couldn't handle anything. Now I know that's not true.
The storm passed by evening, revealing a landscape transformed by fresh snow. The group made camp in a protected valley, and, for the first time in days, they could build a substantial fire. The warmth and light created a circle of comfort in the vast wilderness, and the group found themselves sharing stories that went deeper than their previous conversations. Corporal Park spoke about his dreams since losing his legs, how they had evolved from nightmares about the explosion to dreams where he was running again, but running differently, with a strength and purpose he hadn't possessed before his injury. Lance Corporal Brooks, whose speech had been affected by his brain injury, shared his frustration with being treated as less intelligent because his words came slowly. "People think slow speech means slow thinking," he said carefully.
"But my mind works just different now. Sometimes better, because I have to think before I speak."
Sergeant First Class Mitchell talked about his family's struggle to understand his invisible injuries, the way chronic pain and PTSD affected every interaction even when he tried to hide it.
"My kids don't understand why Daddy can't play like he used to. But maybe I can teach them something about persistence instead."
Technical Sergeant Wine, who rarely spoke about her burn injuries, described the long process of accepting her changed appearance and learning to see herself as beautiful again. "The scars tell a story," she said, pulling back her sleeves to reveal the damaged skin she usually kept hidden. "They're not pretty, but they're proof I survived something that should have killed me." Sarah realized that each of her teammates had undergone a transformation similar to her own, not a return to their previous selves, but an evolution into something new and potentially stronger. They were all learning to integrate their injuries into their identity rather than being defined by them. The third day presented their most challenging objective, reaching a summit at 11,500 feet elevation where they would establish an observation post and coordinate with aircraft overhead. The route required technical climbing skills and equipment that pushed everyone's adaptive techniques to their limits. Sarah's ascent was the most difficult thing she had attempted since her injury. The specialized climbing equipment allowed her to ascend the rock face using primarily her upper body strength, but it required techniques she had never used before and a level of trust in her equipment that felt like a leap of faith. Halfway up the climb, Sarah's arms began to shake with fatigue, and doubt crept into her mind. This was exactly the kind of situation that had led to her initial despair, a challenge that seemed to exceed her capabilities, proof that some things were simply beyond her reach now.
"Martinez!"
Thompson called from below, his voice carrying clearly in the thin air.
"You've got this. Trust your training and trust your gear." Above her, Wine was providing encouragement and technical guidance from her position on the route. Below, the entire group was offering support and advice.
Sarah realized that she wasn't climbing alone, she was part of a team that was invested in her success. Drawing on reserves of strength she didn't know she possessed, Sarah completed the technical sections and reached the summit. The view from 11,500 feet was spectacular, but more important was the feeling of accomplishment that came from achieving something she had thought impossible. The observation post exercise required the group to work as a coordinated team, using radios to guide an aircraft to their position and provide reconnaissance information about the surrounding terrain. Sarah found herself naturally filling a leadership role, coordinating communications and ensuring that all team members could contribute their specialized skills to the mission. When the aircraft made its verification pass and confirmed their successful completion of the exercise, the cheer that went up from the group echoed across the mountainside. They had accomplished something remarkable, not despite their injuries, but by incorporating their limitations into a new kind of strength. The descent and final 2 days of the survival exercise passed in a blur of successful navigation, team problem-solving, and growing confidence. Each challenge they overcame reinforced the lesson that adaptation and determination could overcome seemingly insurmountable obstacles. On their final morning in the wilderness, as they broke camp for the last time, Sarah took a moment to appreciate how far she had traveled, not just geographically, but personally. The woman who had entered this program 6 weeks ago would not have recognized the person she had become. The return to the training facility felt like returning to civilization from another world. Hot showers, comfortable beds, and regular meals were luxuries they had learned not to take for granted. But, more importantly, they returned as a transformed group of individuals who had redefined what was possible. During the final graduation ceremony, Commander Harrison presented each participant with their adapted weapon as a permanent gift, along with a certificate recognizing their completion of what he called the most challenging survival training program in the United States. "These weapons are yours to keep," Harrison announced, not as trophies, but as reminders. When someone tells you something is impossible, remember what you accomplished on this mountain. When you face challenges that seem insurmountable, remember that you have already overcome what most people would consider impossible. As Sarah held her modified M4 carbine, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. The weapon in her hands was more than a tool, it was a symbol of trust, capability, and the belief that she could continue to grow beyond what anyone, including herself, had thought possible. The drive back to Colorado Springs was quiet, each participant lost in their own thoughts about what they would do with their newfound confidence and capabilities. For Sarah, the question wasn't whether she could return to a meaningful life, but what form that life would take. During the flight back to Washington, Sarah began drafting a letter to Lieutenant Monica Chan, her former commanding officer. This time, the words came easily. "Ma'am, I wanted you to know that the Bronze Star recommendation you submitted was not for the person I used to be, but for the person I was becoming. The explosion in Afghanistan didn't end my story, it began a new chapter. I'm ready to continue serving, not in spite of my injury, but because of what it has taught me about real strength. I hope we can discuss opportunities for someone with my unique qualifications and perspective." When the plane touched down at Dulles Airport, Sarah's family was waiting at the gate. Their faces showed a mixture of relief, pride, and amazement at the transformation they could see in her posture, her expression, and her voice. "Mija," Elena whispered as she embraced her daughter, "you look like you've come home to yourself." Sarah smiled, feeling the truth of those words. She had indeed come home, not to the person she used to be, but to the person she was meant to become. The mountains had given her back something she thought was lost forever, not the use of her legs, but the belief in her own limitless potential. As they drove through the familiar streets toward home, Sarah realized that her journey was not ending but beginning. She had learned to climb mountains from a wheelchair, to lead teams through impossible challenges, and to see her injury not as a limitation but as a unique qualification for helping others discover their own hidden strengths. The weapon Commander Harrison had placed in her hands had been more than a tool of precision and protection, it had been a key that unlocked a future she was only beginning to imagine. Whatever challenges lay ahead, Sarah knew she was ready to face them not as a victim of circumstance, but as a warrior who had learned that true strength comes not from what we can do in spite of our limitations, but from what we can accomplish because of how those limitations have refined us. The word hopeless no longer applied to Sarah Martinez. She had discovered that hope, like strength, could be redefined and that sometimes the most powerful transformations come not from overcoming our obstacles, but from learning to dance with them.